They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority and not as the scribes. And just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. And he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. And they were all amazed. And they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." And at once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. Amen. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, I bring you this word today. Amen. Astounded, amazed. A new teaching. These are just the reactions worth recording that come up out of Jesus' first public encounters, according to the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel has started off at a gallop, really. Rather than taking up where John the Baptist left off after John's arrest, something that gets just a passing mention a couple of verses earlier. Rather than taking up a station on the banks of the Jordan and continue in John's footsteps, Jesus combs the beach for companions. And he finds a few, and then off to Capernaum they go. And he hits town with a flourish. And into the synagogue on a Sabbath, he goes with authority, with intent. And he's got no time for nonsense. This diversion that meets him, this naysayer, a fellow possessed by an unclean spirit, jumps up in the back and challenges the new authority. And the new authority rescues this possessed person from the distraction of disinformation. I've been thinking a lot about this unclean spirit lately. Let's think some more about what might be behind this. Listen to this particular reaction from this person, this singular voice in the crowd, a person speaking with his own astonishment. "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us?" When something new comes to light, a new idea, a new approach, something that threatens familiar patterns of faith, does it not feel like a threat to you? How many of you were practically skipping for joy to come back in the building today? Yeah. You don't have to tell me, I could see it. How many of you feel like we have been under threat? Not from our rights, but it's just heavy. Yeah? And who among us hasn't argued against this change? Even if only in the privacy of our own heads. I don't know why we have to do this or that. It's not a sin to admit that you've done that. I have done that. And occasionally, we will work up the courage to challenge the person or people who present these new ideas or who offer these new solutions. We confront the people because the ideas are nebulous and hard to pin down. So we target the people. That so-and-so has gone too far. That so-and-so hasn't gone far enough. Right? We've done it. We've all done it. That's what the last 12 months has been like. Now, strong ideas are good things. And strong opinions are good things. And capable people who are centered and sensible, they are okay with these lively debates. We can manage them. We can have a fruitful exchange of ideas. It doesn't hurt us at all. Unless it doesn't ever stop. And then screaming antagonism and the presentation of the fear-driven, we've never done it that way before argument begins to take precedence. And that's not helpful. I'm going to suggest to you that this is what Jesus finds himself in the middle of. And Jesus knows the difference between lively debate and what have you to do with us? Why are you putting us through this? We don't know what Jesus preached that day. We have not a single word recorded of his sermon in the synagogue. So we really don't know what provoked these strong reactions. It's possible that their collective anxiety has been given voice by this one possessed individual, a man who cannot help himself, who simply says what everybody else is thinking. And Jesus confronts that negativity and dispossesses this man of his fear. At least that's my hope. And once that happens, the crowd is free to be astonished and wonder aloud, what is this? A new teaching authority that commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey. Jesus' authority may be the very thing that Deuteronomy calls to mind. A prophet like Moses, who speaks not just with God's permission, but with God's authority. And you'll know that that prophet is legitimate because if what the prophet says happens, it's from God. Otherwise, just relax and ignore it because that prophet is doomed anyway. And the Deuteronomy passage might well be the measure of the new teaching that Jesus brought to the synagogue that day. And the proof seems to have been in the doing. This exorcism, such as it was, cements Jesus' authority over even the unclean spirits. That's a big deal. It's new. It's fresh. It's miles beyond what usually happens in faith gatherings where we tend to preach only to the converted. In the established mainstream of so many faith communities, the word is meant to affirm those on the inside and condemn those who don't think like us or who don't belong. And Jesus comes in and turns that over and takes control of the naysayer and convinces him somehow, dispossesses him of his negativity, treats him like one of the gang, welcomes him into the fold, whatever happens. Mark doesn't tell us. Mark's got other things to get to. But I'm wondering, especially this week, if that's how the ministry begins for Jesus in Capernaum. What do you think of that? We've gone past the simple miracle and everybody goes, oh, gee, that's great. Thanks, Jesus. He's never been this good before. No, this is different. What Jesus represents, the thing that is so terrifying and astonishing and wonderful all at the same time, is this radical idea that God cares enough to be with us, completely and unashamedly present in the person of Jesus. And that idea has caused problems for people of faith from Jesus' time to this very day. For if God is present, if in Jesus we are confronted by the most creative, compassionate, most loving thing in all of creation, then we need to reevaluate our own importance in the scheme of things. Faithful people, and I include myself in this generalization, faithful people especially imagine that their efforts toward faithfulness offers them some sort of elevated status, whether it's in heaven or on earth. We, and I include myself in this, are always looking for ways to reach out, to serve the community in a world in a way that might reflect well on God and certainly will reflect well on ourselves. We're a little bit selfish. We want to be noticed for the good things we do. That's not bad. It's just who we are. But then Jesus drops into our midst. God made flesh. And we see him tramping about the countryside with the suddenly unemployed and touching the untouchable and caring for those that most of the time the faithful only mention as potential projects for community improvement. The work of God that Jesus reveals to the world doesn't start in the boardrooms of the synagogues or within the temple's most sacred spaces. Perhaps the seed was planted there, but it's lain dormant for a while. Jesus comes into the midst of the faithful people and stirs up the anxiety of that community by bringing real life into their midst, into the worship spaces, into the holy places. And the faithful are astounded. The church often stands accused of existing only for itself. As someone whose journey into the ministry came after a time of work in other jobs, I heard all kinds of explanations for why people didn't go to church and why the church was not useful anymore. And one of my neighbors met me on the street in a conversation the other day and reminded me unnecessarily that, people are often afraid of ministers of the church. I knew that already because people change when they discover you're part of a faith community. And they change even more when they discover you are a leader in that faith community. So yeah, we've been accused of existing only for ourselves, of holding people to standards that we don't always meet. And our membership drives and our building projects and our catechisms and creeds are all designed to get people to fall in line. You say the right thing, we'll know that you're with us. We baptize people who agree with our principles, right? We all take those promises together, and most of us believe them and try to follow them, but we don't baptize anybody until they're willing to say those things with us. It's not a bad thing, it's just a thing, but it's perceived as club building. The church's detractors will claim over and over again that we've created an exclusive club, and we're not eager to have others join unless it's under our conditions. And I have to tell you, I think sometimes that's true. That's true more often than we'd like to think. And if it is true, it is a club that over the last 11 months has been operating by the skin of its teeth and operating around a variety of very real anxieties and fears, because we're afraid of what this extended pandemic is doing to us personally and us corporately. We're afraid of what it's doing to our institutions, to our mental health, to our effectiveness as the church. And rightly so. Some of those fears are legitimate. Others are groundless. And it's hard to know which is which anymore because they come from so many different directions. What have you to do with us? Are you here to destroy us? Why can't we do what we want to do? And into that thinking comes our gospel lesson for this morning. And in light of that, I wonder what would happen if Jesus breezed into town and took a service in the middle of all of this. The world is full of people that think they know what Jesus would do or say in such and such a situation. Within the church, there are people on both sides of that. Jesus would convince us to stay home. Jesus would want us to be together. Check your Deuteronomy 18 and we'll see which prophecy holds up, I guess. But what would happen if Jesus stood in our midst and offered us hope, or counseled patience? Or perhaps Jesus would stand here and reinterpret our present situation in light of God's magnificence. He would take us out of the equation and say, with some authority, look around and see what's really happening. What do you think would happen then? Would people nod and smile and say, "Good service, Pastor"? Would people scream about the injustice of restrictions and demand their rights? Somebody would no doubt protest outside the building. And if they did, wouldn't Jesus quiet their fear and cast out the demon of their selfishness? As I say, there's no end of people who believe they know what Jesus would do. But that's because the church has always been an imprecise organization, modeled on an imperfect understanding of who Jesus is and what Jesus wants. When we try to be anything else, when we claim authority that is not legitimate, when we profess certainty that has no foundation, when we resist the present reality because our fear of the future won't let us see anything, then we become something other than the church, and we have stopped following Jesus. Jesus' authority then and now comes from his relationship with God. Our creeds and confessions, our opinions and brand new ideas mean very little to Jesus. What Jesus covets is our wonder and amazement. Wonder and amazement that a brand new thing might be happening in our midst, in spite of our objections and fears. And that wonder and amazement is what feeds faith and turns faith into action. Are you tired of living like this? Are you angry that you can't have what you want or what you used to have? Are you frustrated and fed up and you just want things to be normal again? Maybe, just maybe, you should take a deep breath and try and release your fear. Don't be afraid. Because in the midst of all this, God is doing a new thing. Don't be afraid. Be amazed. Be astonished. And open your eyes and watch what God will do next. Amen.